Business news now, and another day of strikes in France, the 12th since the government introduced plans to raise the retirement age by 2 years to 64. The protests have taken a more violent turn, with demonstrators setting fire to a Louis Vuitton store in Paris, even though the number of strikers has fallen steadily since industrial action began earlier this year. The latest protests come a day before the French Constitutional Court is due to rule on the legality of the retirement plan, which the government enacted without a parliamentary vote. The demonstrators have appealed to the council to overturn the bill to restore social harmony in the country.
On espère qu'il y aura des gens un peu intelligents dans ce Conseil constitutionnel qui se disent,
we hope that there will be some intelligent people within the Constitutional Council who will say, well, there are things happening in France. We have to find a way out. We have to find a way out. Come out of this crisis on top. And indeed, the way out is for the Constitutional Council to reject the law. And that's it. And that will allow us to calm down the situation in France. We see that Macron took a can of gasoline, there were flames, and he keeps on pouring jerry cans of pure gasoline on the flames of the mobilization.
Fabien Villedieu, who's a representative of the rail union in France. Well, let's return to London, where Arise correspondent Laurie Laird has the latest on the French strikes, along with the rest of the business news of the day. Good to see you again, Laurie. The 12th day of French strikes. What's the latest from what is starting to look like a battleground?
Some of this video that we're looking at, Charles, really does look like something short of a war zone. Petrol bombs, smoke all over the place, tear gas, people retreating as police are moving in on crowds of people. I've been monitoring a video of this all day, and you're hearing huge crowds of people booing every time they hear the police come near, although the police do seem to have set up some barricades between them and some of the commercial establishments in Paris. And most of the video I'm monitoring is coming from Paris, although there are protests all over the country. But the police do seem to be setting up effective barricades between them and the protesters. I can tell you that, at least according to the police, there seem to be fewer numbers of demonstrators out today. And this has been a bit of a trend from over 1 million, at least according to the unions, a couple of months ago. And of course, the Department of Interior in France has always had smaller numbers than the unions have. But the unions were talking about 1 million plus 6 weeks ago. We are seeing fewer than that. And even the unions will admit to that. But what we are seeing is a great deal more violence than we were seeing 6 weeks ago. And the fear amongst many, and this includes some of those who are protesting peacefully, is that anarchists called the Black Bots have infiltrated, these are far left anarchists, have infiltrated some of these protests and have made everything just that much more dangerous. So what we're seeing is the culmination of a trend: fewer people, but much more violence on any given day.
Well, I guess the question, Laurie, is at this stage, do the protesters have any chance of reversing the decision to raise the retirement age?
Absolutely. And tomorrow is D-Day to a certain extent. The protesters probably don't have, at least in terms of what's about to happen tomorrow, they don't have any direct influence over what might happen. But tomorrow, France's Constitutional Council will meet, and they're going to consider two things. One is whether the passage of this law that raises the retirement age by 2 years, whether that was done legally. And the reason they're considering this is because the government of President Macron, led by Prime Minister Elizabeth Borne, bypassed Parliament altogether. There was no parliamentary vote on this change in the retirement age. Now, this, as far as we can tell, is legal. It is in line with the Constitution, but it certainly doesn't give much legitimacy to this move, which was controversial in the first place. So that's one thing the council will rule on. The other is a request to put this law to a referendum. That is something. So the various opponents have asked the Constitutional Council to consider this. If they consider doing that, well, there are two things. One, they can decide whether this is constitutional or not. If it is not constitutional, then this cannot go into law. If the council decides it is constitutional, that they will then consider whether they will allow a referendum. Then the question of raising the retirement age will go to, will have to be numbers of signatures to go on a petition. If it gets to 10% of the population, then the question will go to all of the French regions. People will vote on whether they want to see this. This is a long-term process, and I think something that might happen if these protests continue is I don't think we should rule out President Macron saying, "Let's pause for a moment. Let me have some dialogue with people. Let's see if I can present this in a different way." I think that is possibly an outcome, but President Macron has said he would like to meet with the union sometime soon, but there's nothing on the books scheduled at the moment.
And very briefly, Laurie, we've seen pictures there of demonstrators setting fire to a Louis Vuitton shop. Is there any significance there?
There is, and that was a Louis Vuitton shop, and the protesters do tend to think that President Macron is a president of rich people, and they have been saying when they stormed the Louis Vuitton shop, they said let the billionaires pay for these pension reform, keep the pension age down, billionaires pay for people's pensions. But it comes just a day after LVMH, which is the parent company of Louis Vuitton, posted some sky high, almost record high profits up 17% over the same period last year, which is much higher than anyone expected. One of the reasons is that Chinese buyers are back. They have helped their buying luxury goods, and that's helped LVMH profits. But certainly there is symbolism to why this store was chosen.
And Laurie, we've got about 30 seconds or so. In Britain, where you are, some pretty good economic news this morning as well.
Oh, absolutely. GDP unchanged in the month of February. That may not sound like very good news, but remember, what we've heard from the IMF, Britain is the sick man of the G7. We had so many strikes in the month of February, so that meant economic activity would have been curtailed, but there wasn't a contraction. Britain has skirted recession for the moment.
Laurie, thanks very much indeed. Laurie Laird, a RISE correspondent, talking to me there from London.